I never imagined that loving someone could feel like standing in the middle of a quiet street, just moments before the sirens turn the corner. You can't see the danger yet, but you can feel it coming, heavy, inevitable, and faster than your heart can keep up. That's what it felt like being married to a police officer. And if I'm being honest, I should have felt the first warning long before I said, I do. My name is Amina, and this is the part of my life I never wanted to say out loud. The part one kept tucked between my ribs like a bruise I pressed on just to make sure I could still feel something. People think they know what it means to marry a cop. They think of bravery, sacrifice, respect. They imagine movie scenes, heroic silhouettes returning home in slow motion. But nobody talks about the shadows that trail behind them. The things they drag through the door at night. The broken pieces of themselves they expect you to hold together. The hidden struggles. The ones I learned too late. He and I met on a Wednesday. A strange day to fall in love, but maybe that's how it was always supposed to be. Unexpected, unplanned, unprotected. I was coming out of a cafe balancing a cup of chai I knew I didn't need, rushing to get to work when he bumped into me. Literally. I remember the chai splashing, my purse dropping, and me muttering something under my breath that my mother would have given me a look for. And there he was, Officer Julian Hart, apologizing with that half-smile men get when they're trying to look harmless. I didn't know then that harmless men don't have smiles like that. Smiles that hide entire worlds behind them. He reached for my purse before I could grab it, handed it to me gently and said, "Let me buy you another chai. It's the least I can do." I told him no the first 3 times. On the 4th I said yes. I've always been weak for persistence, not the annoying kind but the kind that feels like someone sees you in a way no one else has. And he did. At least that's what I thought. We sat near the window in that same cafe, sunlight on my face, his badge still clipped to his uniform. I asked him if he ever got tired of carrying that weight around. He laughed, said, "The badge isn't heavy. The job is." I didn't realize then that he wasn't answering my question. I didn't realize he never really did. But here's the thing about beginnings, you don't hear warning bells. You only hear the softness of someone learning how to say your name. In those early days he made me feel like I was the safest place he'd ever known. He called me every morning. Texted me during lunch. Showed up after long shifts just to sit on my couch and fall asleep with his head on my lap. I used to stroke his hair, thinking he was exhausted from caring too much about the world. I didn't know he was also exhausted from hiding too much of himself. But the hook, the real hook, came one night when we were sitting in my car outside my apartment. It was late, the kind of late when the streetlights flicker and you're not sure if it's the electricity or your eyes playing tricks on you. He looked over at me, his voice low, and said, "I don't feel like I belong anywhere except when I'm with you." That was it. That was the moment he got me. People don't fall in love with grand gestures. They fall in love with the smallest sentences, the ones that echo when the room is quiet. I believed him. I shouldn't have, but I did. That sentence became the foundation I stood on, even when it started cracking beneath me. We fell fast. Faster than I thought was responsible. But when you're in your 30s, you start convincing yourself that speed is maturity. That quick means certain. That love that shows up suddenly must have been searching for you all along. He proposed 8 months later. On a rooftop. With fairy lights he strung himself. Or so he told me. Looking back, I wonder who really put them up. He didn't have the patience for delicate things. I just didn't see that then. Our marriage started like a warm room on a cold day. Safe. Familiar. Almost too perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you wonder what you're not seeing. But I pushed that thought away every time it crept in. I told myself I was paranoid. Trauma from past relationships. A voice I didn't need to listen to. A voice that had protected me before and could have protected me this time. But there were re-hooks. Moments that should have yanked me back to reality. Like the night he came home 3 hours late. No call. No text. Just walked in smelling like cold air and adrenaline. When I asked where he'd been, he said, "Work." One word. No explanation. Or the time he flinched when I wrapped my arms around him from behind, like my touch was a threat instead of love. Or the morning I saw him sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. But every time I tried to lean in, he leaned out. Every question I asked was followed by a kiss on my forehead, a soft, "It's nothing, baby," or a change of subject. And I let it slide because love, real love, can make even the most perceptive women blind. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that I wasn't married to just a man. I was married to a job. A system. A world that expected him to be two people at once and punished him for failing at either. A world that gave him power during the day and stripped him down to his fears at night. And he gave me the pieces left over. But the real beginning of the unraveling happened on a Wednesday too. Wednesdays seemed to love circling back in my life. I had cooked dinner, his favorite shrimp and rice with too much garlic the way he liked it. I waited. And waited. And waited. When he finally walked through the door near midnight, I asked if everything was okay. He didn't answer. He didn't even look at me when he brushed past. He went straight to the bathroom, slammed the door and turned on the shower. The water ran for 30 minutes. Then 40. Then 50. I knocked gently and asked if he needed anything. He said nothing. Not a single word. When he finally came out, the steam followed him like a ghost. His eyes were red, not from the heat but from something deeper. Something I wasn't ready to understand. I asked, "Julian, what happened tonight?" He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw nothing behind his eyes. No warmth. No pain. Just emptiness. He said, "Please don't ask me that again." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just married to him. I was married to everything he refused to say. I wanted to hold him, but he wouldn't let me. I wanted to help him, but he wouldn't let me in. I wanted to understand him, but he barely understood himself. And there it was, the rehook that pulled me into the truth I kept avoiding. Loving someone who runs into danger for a living means you become the quiet place they collapse into. But what happens when they stop collapsing and start shutting you out completely? In the nights that followed, things shifted. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But subtly, like sand slipping under a door. He became colder. Quieter. More distracted. He barely touched me, barely spoke, barely existed in the same room even when he was standing right in front of me. He'd come home late, take his gun off, place it on the counter and stare at it longer than any husband should stare at anything that deadly. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the floor beside the couch, leaning against it instead of sitting on it. I'd ask, "Why don't you go to bed?" He'd shake his head and whisper, "I'm fine here." But he wasn't fine. And neither was I. One night, as he slept next to me, tossing and turning like he was wrestling with invisible hands, he mumbled something that made my skin prickle. I couldn't understand most of it, but I heard him whisper, "Don't shoot." His voice was small. Fragile. Like a child's voice trapped in a grown man's throat. I touched his arm gently and he jerked awake, sitting up so fast he nearly knocked me back. His breathing was sharp, violent, like he'd just sprinted through a nightmare. I said his name. Soft. Careful. He looked at me, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his neck. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought he'd tell me everything. I saw it on the tip of his tongue. The truth. The fear. The weight he carried. But instead, he wiped his face and whispered, "Go back to sleep, Amina." And that was the problem. We went back to sleep on things we should have woken up for. So I held on. Because that's what love taught me to do. When someone is breaking, you don't let go. You hold tighter. You stay. You hope. But hope can be dangerous when it's the only thing holding a marriage together. And if I had known what was coming next, the night the truth would crack open right in front of me, I might have held on differently. Or not at all. Because the hidden struggles, the ones I hadn't seen yet, they were about to show themselves. And when they did, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I used to believe marriages fall apart suddenly. One big moment, one final argument, one betrayal that snaps everything in half. But now I know the truth. Marriages don't explode. They crumble. Slowly. Quietly. Piece by piece. And sometimes, you don't even realize what you're losing until you're holding dust in your hands. After that night, the one where Julian woke up gasping, sweat dripping from his hairline down to his chest, something shifted between us. Something subtle but sharp enough to cut any closeness we had left. I kept waiting for my husband to come back to me. Not physically, he was there, sitting at the table, lying beside me in bed, walking around our apartment like a ghost wearing his own skin. I mean emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The part of him that promised me forever in a dimly lit rooftop with fairy lights that may or may not have been his idea. But he didn't come back. Not really. I would ask him about his day and he'd murmur, "Long." I would ask if he wanted to talk and he'd say, "Not tonight." I would touch his shoulder and he'd stiffen like affection was a weight he didn't know how to carry anymore. And every time he shut down, it was another rehook pulling at me, reminding me that something was deeply wrong. Something bigger than both of us. One Saturday morning I decided we needed a break. A day together. Just us. No uniforms. No guns. No late-night phone calls. No silence that felt louder than shouting. I made breakfast, pancakes, eggs, fruit on the side the way he liked. I even played the playlist we used on our road trips. Songs that once made him kiss my hand while driving, whispering lyrics he barely knew. When he walked into the kitchen, I smiled like hope wasn't breaking my heart every day. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound light. Casual. Unbothered. He nodded once and headed straight for the coffee machine. No kiss. No smile. No warmth. Just passing through. Like I was a wall he had to walk around. I watched him as he stirred his coffee, his shoulders tense, jaw tight. I reached out, touching his arm gently. He flinched. I pulled back immediately. "Julian, can we talk?" My voice was soft. Careful. Like I was approaching a wounded animal. He didn't look at me. "About what?" "About us," I whispered. He took a long sip of coffee, still staring at nothing. "We're fine." "We're not fine and you know it." He finally turned. His eyes looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. "Amina, I don't have the energy for this." "That's the problem," I said, trying not to cry. "You don't have energy for me anymore." He set the cup down harder than he needed to. "It's work. You know it's work." "What about work?" I pressed. "Tell me. Talk to me. I'm your wife. I'm supposed to know what you're going through." He shook his head, running a hand over his face. "You don't want to know what I'm going through." "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "I do." He exhaled long and slow. "It's not for you to carry." "That's not your choice," I whispered. "You married me. We promised each other everything. Even the hard stuff." He stared at me in a way that made my stomach twist. Like he was deciding whether to open a door or keep it locked forever. Then with a tired shrug he said the words that changed something in me. "I can't give you everything right now." Not won't. Can't. It was the most honest thing he had said in weeks. But honesty without explanation is just another form of abandonment. I felt myself swallowing disappointment so deep it tasted bitter. "Can you at least try?" He looked away again. Silence answered for him. That was my first real sign that I wasn't losing him. I had already lost him. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. The next rehook came a few days later. He got a call at around 2 a.m. His phone buzzed on the nightstand loud enough to wake me. When he grabbed it, he didn't even try to hide it. He answered immediately, voice low. "Yeah. I'm on my way." "What's going on?" I asked, sitting up. "Call out," he said, already pulling on his pants. "At this hour?" "It happens." He grabbed his belt, his badge, his gun. The sound of the metal clinking sent a chill down my arms. "Be careful," I whispered. He nodded, but his eyes were somewhere else. Already at the scene, already gone. He left without saying, "I love you." He always used to say it. Even half asleep. Even rushed. Even distracted. But not anymore. I couldn't fall back asleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment. The same quiet that had become my constant companion, my unwanted roommate. I waited for a text that never came. Hours later he returned smelling like sweat, dirt, and fear. Real fear. Not the kind you see on people walking home alone at night. The kind that comes from seeing something you can't unsee. He didn't go to the shower this time. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He didn't move for a long time. I sat beside him, placing a careful hand on his back. "Julian, talk to me." He shook his head slowly. "I can't." "Why?" "Because I don't want to bring this into our home." "But it's already here," I whispered. "It's been here." He didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He just sat there breathing like each inhale burned and each exhale hurt. Later that morning, after he finally fell asleep, my phone buzzed. It was my friend Tasha. She asked if everything was good between us. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. Instead, I stared at Julian's back, broad, strong, but trembling in a way I'd never seen before. I watched him twitch in his sleep like he was fighting off something only he could see. I realized something then, something that rehooked me so sharply I felt it in my chest. I was living with two versions of him. The man I married. and the man his job was turning him into. And these two versions were drifting farther apart every day. Till I tried. Kept trying. I tried so hard I started losing myself in the process. I cooked his favorite meals. He barely touched them. I planned date nights. He canceled every single one. I bought him a new watch to replace the one he broke. He didn't even open the box. I kissed him goodnight. Sometimes he pretended to be asleep so he wouldn't have to kiss me back. The distance wasn't in miles. It was in moments. Then came the night that pushed me past fear into something deeper. Something like dread. He came home unusually early. It wasn't even sunset yet. But something was off the second he stepped inside. His movements were stiff. His face was blank. His shirt had a smear of something dark on the sleeve. Julian. I stepped toward him. What happened? He didn't answer. He walked past me straight to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, closed it. Opened it again, closed it again. Like he was looking for something but didn't know what. Talk to me, I said, following him. Finally he turned toward me and I froze. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from drinking, he barely drank. Not from crying, he never let himself cry. It was something else. Something wild. Something I had never seen in him before. Something that made my heartbeat stumble. I need you to go to the bedroom, he said softly. Why? Just go. No, I said, my voice shaking. Tell me what's wrong. He exhaled sharply, pushing both hands through his hair. I can't. Not right now. Julian. Amina, he snapped. I stepped back. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice the air around us. The sound of my name breaking in his mouth was my next rehook. A reminder that love doesn't just fade. Sometimes it fractures. He stared at me, regret flashing across his face for a split second before disappearing behind that same blankness he wore like armor. He walked away from me. That night, I lay awake listening to him pace the living room. Back and forth. Back and forth. 4 hours. Like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. At one point I walked out quietly, peeking from the hallway. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was sitting on the floor, back against the couch, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. His gun sat next to him on the carpet. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know if I should go to him or leave him alone. I didn't know if my touch would soothe him or shatter him. I didn't know if the man on the floor was still my husband, or someone I couldn't reach anymore. I called his name once. Softly. He didn't move. I whispered it again. Still nothing. So I walked back to the bedroom and cried into the pillow. Silently. Carefully. Because even in my own home I felt like my pain needed permission to exist. That was the night I stopped pretending things would magically go back to the way they were. Because here's what I learned, one painful piece at a time. When you marry a police officer, you don't just marry a man. You marry every call he answers. Every fear he buries. Every nightmare he suppresses. Every piece of humanity he loses along the way. And somewhere in all of that, you risk losing yourself too. But even then, even with all the cracks, I didn't know the worst was still ahead. I didn't know that the breaking point, the moment that would change everything, was already on its way toward us. Like a siren in the distance. Getting louder. Getting closer. And bringing a truth I was nowhere near ready to face. I used to think the hardest part of loving a police officer was the waiting. The phone sitting there like a warning sign, the silence stretching thin, every minute carving tiny cracks in my chest. But I learned that the waiting wasn't the real danger. The real danger was what the waiting slowly turned me into. I remember the night I first noticed the shift. The night the woman I used to be quietly slipped out of my skin. He had left for a double shift again. Not unusual. Not even worth questioning at this point. But that night, instead of sleeping, instead of trying to talk myself down from imaginary cliffs, I found myself pacing the living room with this tightness in my jaw and this strange heat under my skin. And it wasn't worry. It wasn't fear. It was anger. A kind of anger that felt too heavy to belong to me. A kind of anger that didn't start with him, but somehow ended with him. I kept checking the time. Midnight. 1:07, 2:50. The hours dragged like a wounded animal. And there I was, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. My hair a mess, my face tired, my eyes hardening. I didn't look like a woman waiting for her husband. I looked like a woman preparing for a confrontation she didn't want but knew was coming. For the first time, A quiet thought touched the back of my mind like a whisper sliding under the door. A whisper that said, "What if this is only going to get worse?" That was the rehook. The moment something deep inside me said, "Pay attention. This is not normal. This is not sustainable. This is not who you are supposed to become." But I ignored it. Or maybe I wasn't ready to understand it. I kept telling myself that every marriage has a breaking point. This must just be ours. Couples fight, couples get tired, couples lose themselves until they find each other again. Right? But the truth is, we weren't losing ourselves. I was losing myself. He was just changing. And I don't know if it was the job changing him or if the job revealed parts of him he kept tucked away. But the man who walked back through that door at 4 a.m. wasn't the same man who kissed me before he left. He entered quietly, dropping his equipment like it weighed more than he could carry. His shoulders were slumped, his jaw tight. There was dried something, mud, dirt, grief, I don't even know, on his uniform. And when he finally looked up at me, his eyes felt older, darker, like he'd lived another lifetime in 8 hours. A lifetime I wasn't invited into. He whispered, "Hey," but the sound was hollow, scraped thin. I didn't even get a chance to answer before he walked past me, straight to the shower. No kiss. No explanation. No acknowledgement that I had been sitting awake all night imagining police lights outside my door and officers in uniform telling me the words every spouse fears. And the silence he left hanging in the air followed me like a shadow. When he came out of the shower, he didn't tell me about his night. He didn't tell me what happened. He just said he was tired. Too tired to talk, too tired to eat, too tired to even look at me properly. He collapsed into bed and turned away from me. And that was the second rehook of that moment. Because as I watched him sleep, I realized something frightening. I wasn't worried about what he saw out there anymore. I was worried about what he was bringing home. I didn't sleep beside him. I couldn't. I lay awake staring at the shape of his back under the blanket, wondering if that shape was still my husband or just the shell of the man he used to be. I listened to his breathing and it sounded different too, deeper, heavier, edged with something I couldn't name. By morning I expected him to say something. Explain something. Offer anything. But he just grabbed his uniform again. Yes, the same uniform that hadn't even fully dried yet, and headed back out the door. He didn't look back. But I did. I kept looking back because every part of me knew something was slipping. The following week only made it clearer. He became even more unpredictable. Some days he came home talkative, almost manic, his stories bouncing from one adrenaline-filled encounter to another like he was trying to outrun the weight in his chest. And then other days he shut down completely, sitting in the dark living room like a statue, staring at nothing, breathing like each inhale cost him something. And I kept trying to reach him. I kept trying to pull him out of that storm. But every attempt felt like touching someone who was drowning and pushing me underwater with him. One night while I was cooking dinner, he walked in and slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. I froze. Not because I was scared of him, but because I didn't recognize that kind of rage in him. He dropped his badge on the table and just stood there, breathing like he'd run a marathon straight through hell. His eyes were red, not from crying but from something darker. Something simmering. I asked him what happened. He didn't answer. I walked closer. He stepped back. I reached for his hand. He pulled it away like my touch burned him. And then, finally, like someone pressing the last button he had left, he exploded. "I'm tired," he snapped. "I'm tired of everyone needing something from me every second. I'm tired of this job. I'm tired of the pressure. I'm tired of..." He stopped, his chest rising and falling. Then he whispered something that cut deeper than anything he'd ever said. "I'm tired of coming home and still feeling like I'm not done fighting." The words hung there. And for the first time I didn't know whether he was fighting the world. Or me. Rehook number 3 hit me right there. Because suddenly I realized the hidden struggles weren't just his. They were becoming mine too. His battles were moving into my house, sitting at my table, sleeping in my bed. But the worst part wasn't the anger. It was how quickly he turned soft again afterward, like the storm had passed through him and left him hollow. He grabbed me, held me tight, apologized with this broken voice that didn't sound like him at all. And that shift, from rage to remorse, from silence to suffocation, became our new normal. There was a night not long after when I found myself sitting in the bathroom crying quietly so he wouldn't hear. The kind of crying that doesn't make sound, just shakes through you. And as I stared at my reflection, red-eyed, exhausted, I realized I had stopped asking myself, why is he like this? The real question had become, how much more can I take? That was the hook I didn't want to admit. The re-hook that wrapped around my ribs and dragged me into reality. Because loving him used to feel like holding on to warmth. Now it felt like holding onto a grenade with the pin half pulled. And deep down, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud, I already knew. The real explosion hadn't even happened yet. I used to believe every relationship had a moment. The moment when everything quietly shifts. Not a loud moment, not a dramatic one, just a click in the universe that tells you, nothing will be the same after this. And if I'm being honest, I think mine happened on a Wednesday. A regular Wednesday. A forgettable Wednesday. One of those days that should have blended into the week like soft colors, but instead, it burned itself into my memory like someone held a match to my skin. It started simple. He didn't come home again. And that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the feeling that settled over me this time. This strange calm, almost peaceful, like my heart had decided it was done panicking, done pacing, done waiting for the sound of boots on the floor. It wasn't numbness. It was a quiet acceptance. A whisper inside me saying, you're getting used to drowning. That was the hook. The one that made me realize survival can sometimes feel like surrender if you're not careful. I sat on the couch with the TV on mute, watching people laugh and talk on a show I wasn't even following. Their joy felt foreign, like something belonging to another species. I kept glancing at the clock. 9, 11:30, 1:14 in the morning. Until finally my body gave up and I drifted into a restless sleep right there on the couch. What woke me wasn't him coming home. It was the vibration of his phone. He had left it on the coffee table. That alone was strange. Officers never forget their phones. Not when they're on call, not when they need to be reachable every second. So the fact that it was sitting there, screen glowing in the darkness, that already felt wrong. I shouldn't have looked. I know I shouldn't have. But sometimes life gives you a door you didn't ask for and instinct pushes you to open it. The message flashed again. Same name. A woman. And it wasn't a one-off, innocent text. The preview lit up with a sentence that sliced through my chest before I even unlocked the phone. I can't stop thinking about what you said last night. My breath hitched. My hands shook. And the world just quieted. Not in a dramatic, shattering way. In a slow, creeping, icy way. Like grief being poured straight into your bloodstream. I unlocked the phone. My thumb moved before my mind caught up. And there was a string of messages. Friendly. Familiar. Too familiar. Not outright incriminating, but intimate in a way that didn't belong to friendship. Late-night jokes. Half-finished thoughts. A picture she sent, not inappropriate but carefully posed. A selfie that didn't need words to reveal intention. And his replies, short but not shutting it down. Not once. The re-hook slammed into me like a wave. The realization that sometimes the danger isn't the cheating. It's the closeness that leads up to it. I didn't cry. I wish I had. I wish my body had done something dramatic to match the ache twisting inside my chest. But all I felt was this heavy, suffocating pressure, like the walls were leaning in closer just to watch me break. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. Screen down. Like covering a wound. When he finally walked in hours later, I didn't yell. Didn't question him. Didn't even mention what I saw. Because the moment he stepped through that door, I could already tell the version of him walking toward me wasn't the version who had sent those messages. This version was tired. Bruised somehow. Carrying something he couldn't say out loud. And that's what made it worse. Not the messages. But the fact that he no longer belonged fully to me. Or to himself. He kissed my forehead like nothing was wrong. Like we weren't drifting into different lives even while standing in the same room. He smelled like sweat, like the night air, like exhaustion. And somewhere underneath all that, something faint. Something floral. A perfume I didn't wear. I stayed quiet. I cooked breakfast for him while he showered. My hands working on autopilot, my mind trapped in a loop that kept replaying her name on his screen. I heard the water running and wondered how many times he washed himself clean of the world before stepping into our home, and how much he chose to wash away. When he sat down to eat, he barely looked at me. And I studied him like observing a stranger. The little details I once loved. The way he rubbed his forehead when he was tired, the scar near his jawline, the way he rolled his shoulders like his uniform was still weighing him down. Even those things felt distant. Nearly foreign. I asked him how his shift went. A gentle question. A familiar one. And he snapped back with irritation at a volume that didn't match the moment. I just got home, he muttered. Can I breathe? That was the second rehook of the moment. Because I realized the space between us wasn't because of the job alone. Something else was pulling him away. Something or someone. Later that afternoon when he finally fell asleep, I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were dark and swollen even though I hadn't cried. My hair was tied back, messy, tired. My skin looked dull like the light inside me had dimmed. And for a moment I didn't recognize myself. I whispered to my reflection, "This can't be love. Not like this." But love is tricky. Stubborn. It holds on long after it should have let go. And when I heard him shift in his sleep, something inside me softened instinctively, like muscle memory. Because despite everything he was still the man I loved. Still the man I promised myself to. Still the man whose job already took so much from him that I felt guilty taking even an inch more. But in the pit of my stomach, a new question formed. Uninvited, sharp, honest. If he is drifting away. If he is finding comfort in someone else's voice. If he is losing himself. Then what am I losing? The rest of that week passed like walking through fog. He went to work. Came home. Slept. Left again. Our conversations became short, brittle things, snapping in the air the moment they touched the wrong emotion. And every time his phone buzzed, my heart tightened. The silence between us grew louder. It stretched between us at the dinner table. It echoed in the car. It settled into the bed like a third presence, watching us, measuring the distance. But the moment that broke me, the moment that pressed its fingerprint into my soul, came 3 days later. He left his jacket on the chair. And when I picked it up to hang it, a folded note fell out. Not a text message. Not a digital breadcrumb. A real note. Handwritten. Soft paper. Curved letters. Stay safe tonight. I worry every time you walk out that door. It wasn't my handwriting. The rehook hit so hard I lost my balance for a second. Because suddenly this wasn't just emotional distance or late-night texts. This was care. Fear. Attachment. This was intimacy. I sat on the edge of the bed holding that note like it might bite me. My heart was pounding, my throat closing up. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Because I finally understood something I wasn't ready to face. The hidden struggles of marrying a police officer weren't just about fear for his life. They were about fear for our marriage. Fear that the uniform didn't just demand his time and energy, but his loyalty. His heart. Pieces of him I no longer had access to. And the scariest part? I couldn't even tell if he knew he was slipping away. As I placed the note back exactly where I found it, one thought settled in my chest like a heavy stone. I wasn't just losing him to the job. I was losing him to a world I wasn't part of. Maybe. To someone who was. And deep inside, a truth curled itself into a whisper against my ear. A whisper I tried to ignore but couldn't unhear. The real storm hasn't even arrived yet. There are moments in life when the truth doesn't come crashing in. It seeps. Slow. Creeping. Like water slipping under a door, soaking the floor before you even realize you're standing in a flood. That's how the next days felt. I kept moving through the house like a ghost, picking up things that weren't mine, cleaning messes I didn't make, living a life that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I could feel something unraveling inside me so quietly that even my breathing seemed different. And the strangest part was that he didn't notice. Or maybe he did. But noticing required acknowledging, and acknowledging required honesty neither of us was ready for. One evening, while he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, not talking, not looking at me, I caught myself thinking, how did we get here so fast? It hadn't been fast. It had been slow erosion. But it felt sudden, like waking up to find half the house gone. I kept glancing at him, trying to catch a glimpse of the man I married. And every time I saw flashes. His jawline, the curve of his shoulders, the familiar rhythm of his breathing. But none of it felt like him anymore. It felt like a stranger wearing his body. The hook hit me right there. Not loud. Just quiet and sharp. A realization that this wasn't a phase. This was a shift. A pivot. A moment in our story where everything bent in a direction I didn't recognize. He finally looked up at me, and the way he said my name made my chest tighten. Soft. Hesitant. Like the distance between us was making him nervous too. "You okay?" he asked. And I almost laughed. A bitter, painful kind of laugh that stayed locked behind my teeth. I wanted to say, "No. I'm drowning." I wanted to say, "How long have you been sliding away from me?" I wanted to say, Whose words are you thinking about when you stare into space like that? But instead I said the lie couples tell each other when the truth feels too fragile to speak. I'm fine. My voice cracked on the word and he caught it. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but not concern. Not love. Suspicion. Like he was worried I might ask him something he wasn't ready to answer. The rehook arrived like a cold wind down my spine. Because when a man starts looking at you like you're the threat instead of the safe place, the love has already shifted. Something has already broken. He turned away again. Scrolling. Always scrolling. The next few days passed in a blur. Him leaving early, coming back late, leaving again. Meanwhile, my mind kept circling that note like a shark circling blood in the water. Who was she? How close were they? How long had this been going on? Every time he picked up his phone, my heart clenched like a fist. And every time he put it face down, I felt a little piece of myself peel away. But the moment everything truly snapped wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was the night he came home and forgot to pretend. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when the door opened. I waited for the usual, heavy sigh, tired grunt, some half-hearted greeting, but instead he laughed. Soft laugh. Warm. Unguarded. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I froze. Dish in hand. Soap sliding down my wrist. My heart suddenly pounding in my ears. He was laughing, at a message. At a conversation. At someone who wasn't me. He didn't see me watching him as he typed back, smiling at the screen like it held a piece of light he'd been missing. And the way his shoulders relaxed, completely, instantly, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't stressed with her. He wasn't guarded with her. He wasn't exhausted with her. He was someone else with her. Someone lighter. Someone happier. I set the dish down before I dropped it. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too hot, too suffocating. I walked into the living room slowly, like approaching a wild animal, unsure of what version of him I'd get. He looked up at me startled. Not guilty, just startled. Like he had forgotten I was even home. And that right there, was the wound that hurt the most. I said his name softly. He locked his phone instantly. Too quickly. Too instinctively. And his voice shifted in real time, like he snapped a mask onto his face. "What's up?" he asked, tone flat, forced. That's when I felt the rehook slam into my chest. Because that moment shattered the last illusion I had been holding on to. The illusion that his distance was about the job, the stress, the trauma. But no. That small, instinctive flicker of guilt told me the truth. He wasn't just escaping the job. He was escaping me. I didn't confront him. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I said something ordinary, something stupid, something forgettable. "Dinner's almost ready." He nodded and set his phone aside, face down again. Always face down. We ate in silence. The kind of silence that tastes like metal. The kind that fills your mouth until you're chewing on your own fear. That night when he fell asleep, I lay awake again, staring at him in the dark. And as I watched the rise and fall of his chest, a truth seeped into me so slowly it almost felt like poison spreading through my veins. This marriage wasn't dying because of the job alone. It was dying because he had already found a place, a connection, a comfort, outside of it. Outside of us. And maybe he didn't realize it. Maybe he didn't intend for it to happen. But intentions don't stop the damage. The next morning I woke to the sound of his phone buzzing. He was in the shower. And the phone buzzed again. And again. Same name. The woman from the messages. The woman from the note. The woman whose laughter echoed in his smile last night. A hook so sharp it felt surgical sliced straight through me. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't look at it. Didn't move toward it. Instead, I sat there on the edge of the bed with my hands shaking and my heart pounding, realizing something I had been too scared to admit. I wasn't angry because he might be cheating. I was broken because he was slipping into someone else's arms emotionally, and emotional infidelity cuts deeper than physical ever could. By the time he stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming to himself like the world wasn't crumbling under our feet, I had already made a decision. I needed answers. Real ones. Not assumptions. Not guesses. Not feelings. I needed the truth. And I knew that when I asked him, when I finally stood in front of him and demanded honesty, our entire life would hinge on the next breath he took. Because the truth could either save us, or end us. And deep down, somewhere fragile and unspoken, I already feared which way the truth would fall. There's a certain kind of silence that settles right before a truth breaks open. A quiet that isn't peaceful, it's heavy. Charged. Waiting. I felt that silence the moment I walked into the kitchen that morning and saw him sitting at the table lacing his boots. He looked tired. Not the usual tired, this was deeper. Like even closing his eyes hurt him. And maybe that should have softened me. Maybe I should have waited for a better moment. But something inside me had reached its limit, and you can only stretch a heart so far before it tears. I stood there, hands trembling, breath thin, watching the man I loved get ready to walk into another day where I wasn't sure I existed anymore. He glanced up. "Morning," he said quietly. And even that single word felt fragile. Like he already knew something was coming. Like his voice had braced itself. I sat across from him. He noticed instantly. He paused with one boot half-laced and looked at me like he was waiting for an explosion. But what he got wasn't an explosion. It was the softest, most dangerous version of truth. "We need to talk." There was. The sentence every couple fears. The one that tilts the room and stops the air. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped. And in that tiny, silent moment, I already had my answer. He knew. He knew what this was about. Not the job. Not the stress. Not the long nights or the dangerous calls. He knew it was about her. I took a breath I didn't feel ready for. "You've been distant," I said softly. "Not just tired. Not just overwhelmed. Different." He barely blinked. "And I know," my voice wavered. I swallowed. "I know there's someone else you talk to. More than you talk to me." His eyes finally lifted to mine. And that look, God, if I could erase one memory from my life it would be that look. Because it was filled with everything at once. Guilt, fear, confusion, shame, and a truth he didn't want to say out loud. "I haven't cheated." His voice trembled, not loud but trembling in that way people speak when they're scared their own words might become knives. "I didn't ask if you slept with her," I whispered. "I asked if you're closer to her than you are to me." That hit him. I watched it. His throat tightened. His eyes shifted away. His chest rose in one deep, painful inhale. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Heavy. The hook slid into the moment like a blade, because sometimes the truth doesn't need words. Silence is enough. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them, even though the room wasn't cold. "She listens," he finally said. Barely audible. Barely breathing. And that single sentence cracked something inside me so loudly I swear the air changed shape around us. "She listens," I repeated more to myself than to him, like testing the taste of it. He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know when it happened," he said. "I don't know how. I come home exhausted and you're worried or upset or scared and I get overwhelmed. But she talks to me. About nothing. About everything. And it's easy. Too easy. There are moments when your heart splits in two, one half breaking, the other turning cold. I felt both halves at once. "I love you," he said. And for the first time in a long time I believed him. But love wasn't the question anymore. Love wasn't the problem. Love wasn't enough. "It's not about loving me," I whispered. "It's about choosing me." He looked up like the words physically struck him. His eyes shined, not with tears, but with the realization that he'd crossed a line he didn't even see until it was behind him. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." And that's when the re-hook carved itself into my chest. Sometimes pain doesn't come from betrayal. Sometimes it comes from the person you love not fighting hard enough to prevent it. I leaned back in my chair because my body couldn't hold itself upright anymore. "I stayed up every night worried you'd get killed," I said. "And you were out there finding comfort in someone else's voice." He winced. His shoulders curled inward like the shame alone could crush him. And for a moment I almost reached for him. The muscle memory was still there. Reach for him, soothe him, hold him together. But then I remembered the nights I cried alone. I remembered the text, the note, the perfume, the laughter he didn't share with me. So I kept my hands to myself. "I don't hate you," I said. He looked up startled. "I don't. But I can't pretend nothing happened. I can't pretend we're okay." He nodded slowly, eyes wet now. Not crying, just holding the weight of it. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. And that question, that was the moment I felt a final shift inside me. Because he wasn't asking how to fix us. He was asking what decision I was going to make. He had already stepped back and handed me the steering wheel of a car we both crashed. What did I want him to do? I wanted him to fix it. Fight for it. Fight for me the way I fought for him every night he walked into danger. But wanting doesn't rebuild trust. Wanting doesn't erase emotional betrayal. Wanting doesn't heal wounds that haven't even finished bleeding. I need space, I said calmly. My voice sounded older. Tired. Done. He froze as if those words cut deeper than anything else I'd said. Space, he whispered. Yes. Space. Time. Clarity. I need to find myself again. I've been losing myself piece by piece trying to hold on to you. His eyes closed slowly, painfully, like the truth was too sharp to look at directly. Are you leaving me? He asked. And I realized, it wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he'd never expected me to stop waiting on him. Never expected me to step out of the shadow of his badge. I'm not leaving, I said. But I'm stepping back. And I need you to step back too. He nodded, defeated, broken in a way even gunfire hadn't broken him. We spent that night apart in the same house. Him on the couch. Me in the bedroom. And the silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was grieving. The next morning he left early. No kiss. No goodbye. But when I walked into the kitchen I found something on the counter. His badge. His ring. And a note. I'm going to get help. Not just for us. For me. I want to choose you. I hope I'm not too late. The hook landed differently this time. Not sharp, not painful, but bittersweet. Because healing isn't instant. Trust isn't automatic. Love isn't enough, unless both people decide it is. And as I held that note, I realized something I had been too heartbroken to see. The hidden struggles of marrying a police officer weren't just about the darkness he faced out there. They were about the darkness he carried home. The darkness that seeped into us. The darkness we both ignored until it swallowed everything. But the story doesn't end with betrayal. It doesn't end with heartbreak. It ends with a choice. Two people. Two flawed hearts. Standing at a crossroad with a future neither of them can predict. And for the first time in months, I felt something inside me shift back into place. Not hope exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it. A small, flickering light. Something worth reaching toward. Because healing a marriage is like healing a wound. Slow, painful, deliberate. And whether we healed together or apart, at least now, we were finally telling the truth. Sometimes, that's the first step in finding your way home.